Imagine if the AEW Championship was being held by an Impact Wrestling superstar and a WWE wrestler was sent to get it back. It sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? Well, something along these lines happened in the year 2000. The WWF, WCW and ECW were the three hottest promotions in America during this time, and all three companies would end up getting involved in a match that was fought over the ECW Championship. This, in my opinion, is one of the most unique and interesting stories in wrestling history, a story we can hopefully cover from top to bottom in today's video. So sit back as we take a look at the time a WWE wrestler battled a WCW superstar to claim the ECW Championship. So I think the best way to tackle this subject is to first look at the ECW title during this time period. Masato Tanaka was defeated by Mike Awesome for the ECW title on December 13th, 1999, a match that aired on ECW on TNN on December 31st, 1999. This title win here meant that Mike Awesome was a two-time ECW champion, having defeated Tazz and Tanaka at Anarchy Rules back in September to capture his first ECW championship in a triple threat match. After Tazz lost this match and the championship to Awesome, he left ECW to sign with the World Wrestling Federation. Tazz was popular with fans of Extreme Championship Wrestling, and one of the things that ECW fans should be given credit for is how they celebrated with their favourite superstars whenever they agreed to join another promotion. These days, fans can get quite bitter when their favourite superstars jump over to a rival organisation, but in ECW, the fans were happy that you were going off to make more money. ECW fans can sometimes get portrayed as these bloodthirsty savages, but in reality, they were grateful for the hard work that their favourite superstars put into their craft. Keep this in mind, however, as the fans wouldn't be so supportive when Mike Awesome left the promotion a little later on. Anyway, Tazz is now with the World Wrestling Federation after dropping the title to Mike Awesome, and by January of 2000, Awesome's second title reign had just begun. To give a little backstory on Mike Awesome, the guy was a pretty big star in Japan, where he worked most notably in FMW. Awesome had been with FMW during their deathmatch days, and he was also a top star when the promotion moved into a more technical based wrestling company. Another wrestler who would travel to Japan to work FMW shows was Sabu, and it was he who recommended ECW to Mike Awesome. Mike made some sporadic one-off appearances for ECW beginning as early as '93 while continuing to work in Japan. From 1998 to early 2000, Mike Awesome would get booked more frequently in ECW. And yeah, Mike was a unique wrestler. He was a big dude with an incredible amount of agility, and along with this, he wasn't afraid of hard-hitting, stiff matches that would only go on to serve him well in ECW. Fans would be forgiven for looking at Mike Awesome and thinking right off the bat that he was just another big guy wrestler, but take the time to watch his matches. The guy was very talented. Tazz made his WWF debut at the 2000 Royal Rumble, getting a victory over Kurt Angle while also receiving an excellent ovation from the WWF audience in Madison Square Garden. Now a full-time member of the World Wrestling Federation roster, Tazz done what he had to do in the months that followed. He didn't get pushed into the main event, but he was featured as an upper tier mid-carder, and he continued to get good ovations over the next lot of months along with a lot of wins. He would work with many different guys on TV and at house shows, including the likes of Hardcore Holly, the Big Boss Man, Chris Benoit and Chris Jericho, while also picking up a paycheck that ECW simply couldn't offer at this time. Another guy who noticed that ECW couldn't pay him was Mike Awesome. Mike, while holding the ECW Championship, had apparently refused to sign a new contract with Paul Heyman and Extreme Championship Wrestling. Mike was already under contract, but with checks bouncing, contracts being wrote on napkins, and ECW consistently not meeting their agreements laid out in said contracts, you can see that signed papers meant a great deal of nothing in the land of Extreme. Paul Heyman at this point had been captain of a sinking ship when it came to ECW. The company was struggling to not only secure superstars with new contracts, but the company was also in debt to these same superstars. It's been reported that Paul Heyman owed Mike Awesome a lot of money for appearances, and Heyman simply could not afford to pay Awesome. And so here was the ECW champion pretty much earning no money, and the contract he is currently under has been broke multiple times by the company owner when it comes to the laid out monetary agreement. You know, many people, including fans and a lot of ECW originals, took great pleasure in bashing Mike Awesome over his next steps and what he ended up doing in order to keep food on the table for himself and his family. You have to ask yourself if you'd be willing to continue working in ECW, having matches that were legitimately wrecking your body while not getting paid for the privilege. Being loyal to the cause is very noble and all. Old ECW stars tend to talk a lot about being a family and banding together for what they believed in, but if you're a champion of a company and you're still struggling to make ends meet, then yeah, I don't blame Mike Awesome at all for looking elsewhere. I do agree though that he could have forfeited his title on the way out. Mike Awesome was not only good friends with Horace Boulder, maybe better known as Horace Hogan, but they were also cousins, and along with being relatives, the two men had trained together and worked together in Japan and had built a great relationship with each other. Mike would vent his frustrations to Horace during conversations regarding his financial situation with Paul Heyman and ECW, and Horace ended up getting Mike in touch with his uncle, Hulk Hogan. So yeah, Mike Awesome and Hulk Hogan were related, but only through the marriage of Horace's parents. Through Hogan, Eric Bischoff and Vince Russo were made aware that Mike Awesome was in a bad spot in ECW, and they offered him a contract to sign with World Championship Wrestling. Mike signed the deal knowing he was the ECW champion, stating that while it's great being the champion of a wrestling company, it's even better having the ability to provide for your family. Remember too that Paul Heyman had not been paying Mike Awesome and living up to his end of the ECW contract that he signed, so there was practically nothing ECW and Paul Heyman could have done. In saying this, Paul Heyman did plead with Mike Awesome to stay and even threatened him with lawsuits, but really there was nothing Heyman could have done to keep Mike Awesome and his ECW champion. On the April 10th, 2000 episode of WCW Nitro, ECW champion Mike Awesome showed up on World Championship Wrestling programming. While the commentators made sure to mention that Awesome was the ECW champion, he did not show up with his title belt. Awesome said there were discussions regarding him showing the belt on TV, but ultimately Eric Bischoff didn't want to bring lawsuits to Time Warner, WCW's parent company, who were already beginning to look down on World Championship Wrestling. Anyway, this April 10th edition of Nitro ended up being quite infamous for other reasons, mainly Eric Bischoff and Vince Russo beginning the show by stripping every champion of their WCW titles and announcing a new WCW with a focus on younger talent, kickstarting the whole New Blood angle. Also on this Nitro, Kevin Nash made his return to WCW, but during his promo he was attacked by the ECW champion Mike Awesome. After laying out Kevin Nash, Mike Awesome grabbed the mic and he told the fans that when he heard Vince Russo and Eric Bischoff were now in charge of WCW, the opportunity to join World Championship Wrestling was just too sweet to pass up. Eric Bischoff and Paul Heyman would agree to do the right thing and have Mike Awesome appear one last time in ECW to drop the championship. The date would be April 14th, mere days after Mike's WCW Nitro debut. Now, many people have said that Eric Bischoff devalued Mike Awesome by allowing him to go back to ECW and lose to another superstar, but Eric really didn't see it this way. On his 83 Weeks podcast, Eric explained that he was just sick and tired of the whole situation, the constant back and forths with legalities, Paul Heyman getting worked into a frenzy. Eric just wanted the whole scenario over and done with, and he didn't care who Mike dropped the title to. Who he did end up dropping the title to, however, would turn out not to be an ECW superstar. WCW contracted wrestler Mike Awesome would meet WWF contracted wrestler Tazz in a match for the ECW Championship in April of 2000. For that one moment in time, all three companies had somehow managed to come to an agreement where everyone would work together. It was unprecedented at the time. So Paul Heyman contacted Vince McMahon asking if Tazz could make a quick return to ECW to claim the title back. Now, the immediate questions here are obvious. Why would Paul Heyman want to put himself in the exact same situation by having another guy who didn't work for ECW win his title? Why would Vince allow it? Why wouldn't Paul Heyman select another guy from the ECW roster? Well, first you have to understand that ECW and the WWF had a history of working together and had successfully done business in the past, so Heyman wouldn't have had worries about Vince using Tazz in the ECW Championship to his advantage, or so he thought. McMahon wouldn't have worried too much about allowing ECW to use WWF talent. This was also done in the past, plus the aspect of having a WWF guy beat a WCW guy on television must have been quite enticing for Vince McMahon. Paul Heyman maybe wanted to add a little shock value and give the fans Tazz for a little while, seeing as how ECW just lost Mike Awesome. Another theory is that Tazz was selected because he could handle himself if Mike Awesome went into business for himself, but the legit toughness of Tazz has also been the topic of debate over the years, so yeah, take it or leave it. Mike Awesome said he wasn't allowed to change in the ECW locker room that day. He was handed a match script and he was told to follow it step by step. The match itself was only a few minutes long, and when Tazz locked in the Tazz mission and won the match, Mike simply stood up, walked out of the ring and left through the audience. Speaking of the audience, the attendees chanted "You sold out" at Awesome during the entirety of the match. Mike done what he had to do. He dropped the ECW title to a WWF superstar and he went back to WCW to continue on in his new job, a job that actually paid the guy. So what to do now with Tazz? Remember we said that Paul Heyman shouldn't have worried about Vince McMahon using Tazz or the ECW Championship to his advantage? Well, on the April 17th episode of Raw, Tazz made his way to the ring for a triple threat hardcore match. The ECW belt was around his waist, and Jim Ross wasted no time in saying that Tazz defeated the previous champion in less than 3 minutes on his day off. Tazz was protected in this match. He wasn't involved in the pinfall finish, so far so good. The following episode of Smackdown though was a different story altogether. WWF Champion Triple H came out during the second segment of the show, doing his normal gloating alongside Stephanie McMahon. Tazz's music played in the arena, the ECW Champion came out, and Tazz challenged Triple H to a non-title match. Triple H accepted the challenge, telling Tazz that this is the World Wrestling Federation, and Triple H would prove to the world that ECW sucks. Keep in mind, Triple H and Tazz had nothing to do with each other up to this point in storyline. This came out of nowhere. Later in the evening, history was made when the ECW champion faced the WWF champion, albeit in a non-title match, and you'd think that somehow the finish would involve both men remaining protected, some sort of DQ finish maybe, a double countout, a draw. No, the WWF champion Triple H not only delivered a low blow to Tazz and scored the pinfall win with the pedigree, but he also pedigreed Tommy Dreamer, who interfered in the match and would be soon named as the #1 contender for the ECW Championship back on ECW TV. So Triple H, the World Wrestling Federation champion, the representation of the company, had just defeated the ECW champion in the middle of the ring while also taking out the guy who was next in line for the ECW title. Now, it can be argued that the low blow before the pedigree kinda protected Tazz. After all, Triple H had to resort to villainous tactics to win the match, but the history books certainly won't have a little note under the victory saying Triple H cheated to win, that's for sure. Tazz would end up dropping the ECW title to Tommy Dreamer just days later. ECW had their championship belt back. Triple H came out smelling of roses due to the whole debacle, and Tazz arguably came out looking like a complete loser. What a story. It's undeniable here though that Vince McMahon used this whole thing to try and prove WWF's superiority, and this is likely the reason why he allowed Tazz to win the belt. He had one of his guys beat WCW's latest signee, Mike Awesome, and he had Triple H beat the ECW champion Tazz live on WWF programming. Vince McMahon actually spoke about this decision to have Triple H beat Tazz on Smackdown, and the explanation he gave us is pretty empty to say the least. Quote Vince McMahon, History is difficult. When you look back at things like this and you think, well, that didn't speak too well of me trying to help that brand now, does it? And it doesn't speak too well. I can't tell you what my frame of mind was at the time. All I can tell you is I'm sure it was the right thing to do at the time. Mike Awesome then stayed with WCW until the invasion angle kicked off, and this allowed him to work in the WWF for the very first time in his career. Like most of the invading superstars, he wasn't given much of an initial push, history kinda repeating itself here as Mike Awesome is once again used as nothing more than a WWF punching bag. Mike ended up returning to Japan, working for All Japan Pro Wrestling and Pro Wrestling Noah before returning for the ECW One Night Stand event in 2005. His match here with Masato Tanaka was one of the most brutal and hard-hitting matches of the entire show. And we can always come back to Mike Awesome in the future, by the way, there's more to discuss here. Notable also though about this One Night Stand match was how Joey Styles buried Mike Awesome on commentary, talking about how Awesome left to join WCW while still holding the title and all that. I mean, it was one of the biggest burials on commentary I've ever heard. In ECW documentaries released by the WWE and in interviews with Paul Heyman and Joey Styles, Mike Awesome was always painted as a disloyal employee who only followed the scent of money, and this I feel is totally unfair. As stated earlier, yes, I do think his business with the ECW belt should have been wrapped up before he went to WCW, but at the same time, he shouldn't have been expected to work for free either. Putting your body on the line while watching checks bounce isn't the best way to keep a roof over your family's head. And so that was the story of the night WCW, the WWE and ECW worked together. A truly remarkable time in wrestling history for sure that proved that anything was possible back in this era of pro wrestling. I'm not sure that we'll ever see anything like this happen again, but it sure did make for a great story. Thanks for watching.